as you can get off, and then you might be able to cut them with some pruners or a pair of horticultural scissors. Cut them apart, and then just plant them underground. Plant the divisions underground, as much underground as they were before. Generally, I like to keep a ½ inch or an inch of soil at least on top of the rhizomes. You can also grow them from seed. They do need a cold stratification. So, and they're also, they don't like to, the seeds don't like to dry out. And this contraption here on the left is what Darrell came up with. He used to grow and hybridize them in a greenhouse. And so he would clip a stem to a pot and then let the seeds fall into the pot on a piece of wet fleece, so they didn't dry out if the pod opened when he wasn't watching it. So that helped. And what he would do is just plant it in a soilless mix and then cover it with grit. And since it needed cold stratification, he would just leave the pot outdoors during the summer and then over the winter, and then they would germinate the following year. So you probably need maybe 4 or 5 years to get a plant from seed to bloom for you. It's a little slow process. That's one of the things I've asked other nurserymen to why they don't grow more epimediums, because they're really kind of hard to find. And most people have told me is that they don't fill up a 2-gallon pot in 3 months. So they grow too slowly because they're woody plants. And that's why they tend to be a little bit more expensive than other perennials, because it takes a long time to get them up to saleable size. I tend to, especially with the ones that Darrell collected in the wild, if it was a different clone, we keep clone numbers on them. They each have an accession number. So say platypetalum, I might have 5 different accessions. With epimediums, you need different clones to fertilize one another. You can't try and get flowers from 2 plants of the same clone. So many of my customers will ask, they'll tell me what clones they have, and they'll ask me for different ones. This is a high-tech potting system that I have sitting in a wheelbarrow and potting up plants. It's pretty basic system of potting. Planting, many times people ask me when they can plant, and usually I tell them when you have a shovel in your hand, because otherwise it's not going to get done. I plant from as soon as the ground thaws out in the spring until the ground freezes in the fall. We used to put most of our stock back into the nursery in November. You can see here we got caught short with the snow. But Darrell, the first nursery we had, he made very steep beds because most of the plants that he saw in the wild were growing on the north or northwest or northeast side of the hill. So he thinks it's because of the drainage. Many of them were growing on hills that were right next to waterfalls where there was water constantly falling on the plant. But the fact that they're growing on such a steep hill gives them good drainage. And the first nursery that we had very heavy clay soils, and when we first started it, we were losing a lot of plants. So making a raised bed and adding some organic matter, he added pine bark and peat moss to the mix, and it worked out really good. Epimediums are drought tolerant, not because they have like cacti, but because they put down a good root system. And many times when the first year that you put your plant in the ground, it's not going to show that much top growth, but the next year it'll make up for it. It's usually using that time to develop a deep root system. This is kind of what it looks like around here right now. If you're going to clean up your epimediums, and you don't have to, the old foliage will get hidden by the new foliage. And actually, if you leave the old foliage, it will make the new foliage grow a little bit taller. So you'll get a taller plant out of it. But I usually clean up all the leaves just for clean culture because I have so many of them. But this is what you're trying to get out there and get the buds, the old foliage cut back before these new tender growths come up, because they're very tender and it'll take you forever to try and cut back after they come up and mixed with the old growth. So if you have plants that you can just clean up a little bit and leave some of the green leaves, you can do that, or you can just clean them up all together. Some people I know that have big patches of epimediums and no labels. I have to be really careful because I have tons of labels out there, but they'll just take a lawnmower to their patch and clean it up that way. Or you could use a weed whacker. Some of the problems that you might run into with epimediums, voles sometimes will chew on them, but I have to honestly say that I have never had an epimedium plant that the vole has devoured the entire plant. Sometimes they'll chew on them, but I'll just push the damaged rhizomes back down under the soil and they'll usually reroot and come back. Voles tend to go for my species irises and the hostas much better, more so than they do the epimediums. Black vine weevil can be a nuisance. I have never had it so bad that it harms the plants, but the larvae will eat the roots and the adults will chew little C-shaped cuts out of the edges of the leaves. So it makes a little bit of a marring of the appearance of the leaf, but in my opinion, it's not too bad. I use beneficial nematodes to treat my pots. I realize that I'm never going to be able to get rid of black vine weevil. It also feeds on rhododendrons, so there's plenty of food for it around in the neighborhood. So I try to keep the populations as low as I can. Rabbits sometimes will also chew on the new growth of epimediums. So if you can spritz them with hot pepper juice or something like that to keep the rabbits from eating them. I haven't heard many people say that they eat the mature foliage. They just seem to like the new growth. And I have a rabbit that's been living here on the property for the last 5 years. It might be his sons or cousins that are there, but I haven't had them bother.